You know, the Sigma Corporation used to be famous for making super zooms, these lenses that go from wide to extreme telephoto all in one lens. It's great for travel, it's very convenient when you just want to go with an all-in-one lens. But we haven't seen anything in the mirrorless world for a long time until now, because Sigma has just released an APS-C contemporary series 16 to 300 millimeter f3.5 to 6.7. This is going to give us a really nice 24 to 450 millimeter full frame equivalent in one lens. And speaking of travel, we were just in Japan. So traveling through Tokyo and Aizu, Japan, the 16 to 300, I really want to test it out because it's a great travel companion. But is the lens that's giving us this much versatility also giving us a lot of compromises? Are we sacrificing a lot of image quality? I'm Chris Niccolls, this is PetaPixel. Let's go find out. So a lens like this is going to be firmly aimed at tourists, and that's exactly what I was while traveling in Japan. So of course you're going to see photos from Japan, not from Calgary, and I would say arguably Japan is a more beautiful place than here, at least right now this time of year. Now I do also want to make note that I'm shooting this on the Sony a7R5, okay? And I know a lot of people are saying, well, that's a full frame camera, why can't you test this on like an a6700? I would love to, but we just don't have an a6700, and we don't have an unlimited, vault of cameras, unfortunately. I wish we did. That being said, fun fact, this 60 megapixel sensor, when cropped down to APS-C, gives us 26 megapixels of resolution and gives us image quality, dynamic range, and noise very similar to the 26 megapixel APS-C sensor that you can find. So honestly, this is a good compromise. And this lens has to be compact if it's going to be a travel zoom lens. It's got a bit of physical length to it, but it takes 67 millimeter filters on the front, which is super easy. The lens only weighs 615 grams. That's not bad at all. So as I was walking around with this, just one package, it was very easy to carry. And I didn't have to worry about all that snow that we had in Aizu because this thing is, like all contemporary lenses, weather sealed. Now, as for controls, well, there's not much. I mean, we've got a generous zoom ring here, and it's actually really tight. I like that, so it's not going to creep out. But there is a locking switch here to prevent it from creeping out at all if you're just walking around town with it dangling. Although invariably, this will get locked when you pull it out of your camera bag. So that caught me a couple times. Otherwise, we just have a manual focus ring on here for the occasional time that you're going to do that. And what I will also say is I didn't find that I really needed a tripod for any of my shooting because I've got a 6-stop image stabilizer built into the lens. The only thing is we don't have a selector switch for that on the lens, so if you want to turn it on or off, you got to do it through your camera body. So there's normally ducks in this duck pond, and of course it's all frozen over because this is Canada, but it reminds me of this time I was testing autofocus beside this beautiful Japanese lake, Washido, and there was like swans and ducks all over. It was paradise. And so actually the 16 to 300 did a really good job. I mean, not only did I have the telephoto reach to shoot birds like this, but also the autofocus is quick and snappy. This actually uses Sigma's high-speed linear actuators, HLA motors, and that does a really good job, as you can see here, of going from near to far quickly and quietly. So a lens like this, of course, is very versatile because of its big zoom range, but this lens also can get you very close to things. This actually has a really impressive 1:2 life-size reproduction at 70 millimeters. And I was thinking, well, I'll show you guys a shot. I'll take a picture of some dead leaves or some yellow on the ground or something. But then I was thinking, no, wait, I was in a beautiful country where there's all sorts of things to shoot close up. I was at shrines and stuff, and it was really great. So, I mean, just enjoy those photographs while I tell you that although I do really like how close I can get with this lens, you don't get a lot of working distance. Basically, the front of the lens is jammed pretty much right on your subject if you're shooting 1:2 at that 70 millimeters. So, I was finding the shadow of the lens would often get in the way or something like that, and that's unfortunate. The stabilizer did a great job, though, of letting me hand hold, but sharpness is not, it's fine. It's not super sharp at 70 millimeters when you're focusing that close. That's pretty typical. That's where you really want to go to a true macro lens to get the better image quality. But if you're traveling and in a pinch you want to do some nice close-up detail shots, this is absolutely going to do the trick. Sigma has always impressed me when it comes to preventing flare. Their coatings are very good, and this lens is no exception. As you can see here, we're really not getting any loss of contrast, we're not really getting any flare issues, and even stopping the lens down heavily, there's no ghosting. Okay, so let's talk about bokeh on this super zoom. So first, specular highlights. You can see here I did some testing, and yeah, they're not great. I mean, you do get a cat's eye effect shooting wider open, but you can see lots of soap bubble effect, you know, onion rings. It's really very busy specular highlights. And then you can see it in this wonderful place that I just visited. I think it was Japan. And there was all of these situations where I could shoot the roofs of temples, for example, or just, you know, soft transitions when shooting up close. And you can see how the backgrounds look quite harsh and busy. They're really distracting and eye-catching. So I know the 16-300, this is not a fast lens. You're not normally going to be dealing with lots of shallow depth of field, but it does have a big telephoto reach. And if you are extending out there and you're getting those softer backgrounds, they can look a little bit yucky. So I think we have to address this here, okay? So if you're going to make a super zoom like this that's as versatile as it is and not make it $2,000 or insanely gigantic, you are going to have to do some digital correction afterwards. And what that means is this lens has a lot of issues. For example, it's got chromatic aberration, but that gets taken care of digitally in post with the profiles. Or it's got a lot of distortion, especially at the 16mm range. It's actually pretty excessive, but that does largely get corrected in post or in your JPEGs. This lens also has a lot of vignetting, and again, it's the same story. It's easy to fix. It can be done with the profile for JPEGs or in post afterwards, but you got to do those fixes to really correct that stuff. And so look, there's just no getting around the compromises you're gonna have to suffer with a lens like this. There are some issues with image quality and a lot of digital correction being done afterwards, and that's just the way it is when you're dealing with super zoom lenses like this. Otherwise, you gotta carry some primes around or, you know, more reasonable zoom range lenses if you want to avoid a lot of that stuff. And again, you gotta remember the target audience of this is really aimed at tourists and travelers and more casual shooters that just want the simplicity and convenience of a single lens. But is it sharp? Well, I mean, let's take a look at that next. So going to our test charts here, at 16mm, actually the center is decently sharp at f3.5. When I stopped down the lens, I didn't really notice much improvement in the centers. The corners, however, as I've mentioned, have a lot of distortion and vignetting. You're definitely going to see that at f3.5. Those corners are pretty soft, and honestly, stopping down the lens helps a little bit get rid of the vignetting, but it's still not really that sharp. It's always got that blurry look to it. But looking at 300mm, I think the sharpness is better at the long end here. You can see center is fantastic shooting wide open. You know, I only stopped down a little bit because we're already stopped down a fair ways. But even there, of course, it's excellent sharpness. It's already really good. The corners are not bad. We're not getting as much distortion at the 300mm range. Still some vignetting, but you can see that the corners have a bit of softness. Stopping down helps, but again, you're never gonna get super sharp corners out of this lens. And again, for most applications, I think that's okay. What we are left with is actually a very versatile and very convenient super zoom lens. And I think it's also notable that this is starting at 16mm and going to 300. That's a huge range. Most lenses will compromise with like a 28mm full frame equivalent wide angle, maybe going up to 300mm or sometimes 400mm. So this is really giving you that extra wide angle reach. And I did appreciate that when I was back in this beautiful city called Tokyo, just exploring like nighttime scenes and street scenes and big skyscrapers and stuff. It was really, anyways, so this is actually really cool because you are getting that versatility. So remember the target audience that this lens is for. I mean, a good example of that would be the closest competition to this lens. Tamron makes an 18-300mm lens. It sacrifices a bit of that wide angle coverage, but it actually gives you a slightly faster 6.3 aperture at the telephoto range. And I'd love to compare those maybe at a later date, but we actually haven't reviewed the Tamron 18-300 yet, so I can't speak on what it's like optically. So if our video and our samples have shown you that this lens is exactly the right tool for you and you're shooting Sony E mount, Canon RF mount, or Fujifilm X mount, all APS-C, this might be a really cool choice for you, and it's nice to see Sigma coming out with a lens like this after such a long hiatus. Thanks for joining us. We always appreciate it. You should definitely check out the PetaPixel podcast. It plays on this exact same channel or all your favorite podcasting apps. You can just search for the PetaPixel podcast. Also consider getting a membership to PetaPixel.com. That way you can peruse the whole website with no ads, and you're going to get a discount at the merch store. That's really cool. And you'll also get access to sample galleries of the full production gear that we review. You can download those RAWs and those JPEGs and pixel peep for yourself. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you soon with more on PetaPixel.